Countdown to Israel's ground attack as evacuation from Gaza continues. China calls for a ceasefire in the Israel-Palestine conflict. Transport Secretary says MTR should reconsider arrangements under severe typhoon conditions. Good evening and welcome to TVB News. Palestinians scrambled to flee northern Gaza today after the Israeli military ordered nearly half the population to evacuate south. That's more than 1 million people. The evacuation order comes as Israel plans to carry out more airstrikes in northern Gaza, as well as prepare for a possible ground attack, as many tanks are already in place.
Amidst the bombs, leaflets, thousands of them dropped by the Israeli military, telling Gaza residents to flee from the north of the enclave to the south ahead of an expected ground attack. The United Nations said an exodus of more than 1 million people while bombs are raining down, with food, fuel, water and electricity supplies cut off, is untenable. European Union Foreign Policy Chief Josep Borrell, speaking in Beijing, fears a major humanitarian crisis.
Today we are facing a great a very dire humanitarian situation in Gaza, and certainly we discuss about the situation there. And as I said yesterday, I agree a lot with the Secretary General of United Nations when he says that the request by the Israeli army for 1 million people to leave in 24 hours the north of Gaza Strip, it's something that could not be done.
Israel has conducted extensive bombing raids on Gaza since last week's incursion by Hamas, which Israel says killed 1,300 people. Palestinian authorities say 11 workers from UN relief agency UNRWA have been killed by strikes. Tel Aviv has since called up an unprecedented 360,000 reservists for a potential ground assault on Gaza, where they hope to wipe out Hamas and destroy what they believe to be a maze of tunnels beneath the rubble. Battle tanks have also been deployed near Gaza. Aside from the evacuation difficulties, the UN says there is a lack of shelter and transport in other parts of Gaza, with the Rafah border to Egypt also closed because of Israel strikes. In addition, it is near impossible for hospitals in Gaza City to move patients and equipment. The local health ministry said on Friday that roughly 1,900 people had been killed in Gaza. Nazri Karim, TVB News.
Foreign Minister Wang Yi and China's envoys to the United Nations and the Middle East have made an appeal for a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. The foreign minister also reiterated the call for the establishment of a Palestinian state as the only way for real peace in the Middle East. Jacqueline reports.
Foreign Minister Wang Yi made the remarks after co-chairing the latest China-EU high-level strategic dialogue in Beijing with Josep Borrell, High Representative of the European Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy. In a joint press conference, Wang said that as Israel has the right to establish a state, Palestine also has the right to establish a state. He added that injustice towards Palestine has been going on for half a century and should not continue. He said the answer to the Palestinian issue is the two-state solution. That is the establishment of an independent state of Palestine, and only in this way can peaceful coexistence of Palestine and Israel be realized. Wang also stressed given the severe situation now, the top priority is to achieve a ceasefire. Meanwhile, China's Special Envoy on the Middle East, Zhai Jun, met representatives of the Arab League in China. Zhai said China supports the League in playing an important role on the Palestinian issue, and China will continue to provide humanitarian assistance to the Palestinian people. Calling for de-escalation too was China's envoy to the United Nations, Zhang Jun. Speaking at an emergency meeting of the United Nations Security Council, Zhang said protecting civilians is a red line drawn by international humanitarian law, and the indiscriminate use of force is unacceptable.
Our understanding on the seriousness of the humanitarian situation, and there's an emerging voice in the Council that we should take action to really tackle the humanitarian part, and then to really to prevent the further deterioration or a humanitarian disaster.
The Chinese embassy in Israel urged Chinese citizens there to step up precautions given the complicated security situation in Israel. The embassy said it will work to cater to their need to return to China. Jackie Lin, TVB News.
In New York, United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres called on all parties to allow humanitarian aid into the Gaza Strip. This is to prevent further civilian casualties as fighting in the region reaches increasingly dangerous levels.
We need immediate humanitarian access throughout Gaza so that we can get fuel, food and water to everyone in need. Even wars have rules. International humanitarian law and human rights law must be respected and upheld. Civilians must be protected and also never use the shields.
Guterres said Gaza is short of humanitarian supplies, drinking water and power owing to siege and airstrikes, and over 34 health facilities were attacked. He said he has been in constant contact with the leaders across the region. As protesters take to the streets in cities such as Rome, Athens and Islamabad, calling for a free Palestine, cities in the United States are on high alert as protests for both sides of the Israel-Hamas conflict play out across the country. NBC has more.
From the shadow of the U.S. Capitol to the nation's heartland.
Free, free Palestine!
Tonight, from coast to coast, thousands are spilling into the streets in emotional protests over the Israel-Hamas war.
I stand in solidarity with my Palestinian friends and all my friends who want an end to occupation and a just and lasting peace.
In New York, where all officers have been ordered in uniform and on duty, more than 1,000 people packed into Times Square, where officials are watching from the ground and above. All of it comes on the day declared by a former Hamas leader as a global day of anger. But in New York, we found peaceful protesters showing up to voice their own perspectives.
I feel bad because the people die. Like, what is, for what? For the land. They must have it. They have to sit down and they talk.
This is difficult for you.
Yeah.
There's a lot to wrestle with.
Yeah, I mean, I am Israeli, but I'm also human. Like, I don't want anybody to be suffering. Nobody deserves to die. No children deserves to die. Not on the Israeli side, not on the Palestinian side. It's really horrible.
Tonight, police remain on high alert. Law enforcement officials tell NBC News they are monitoring a lot of chatter on social media, both domestic and global, but stress there are no specific credible threats. At Jewish schools and places of worship across the country, a steady stream of added security as synagogues prepare to observe the first Sabbath since last week's attack.
Back locally, following the chaos caused when Typhoon Koinu hit the city last week, Secretary for Transport and Logistics Lam Sai-hung said the MTR should review rail service arrangements when tropical cyclone warning signals number 9 or higher are issued. He suggests that in such cases, trains that are carrying passengers should complete their whole journey.
In the event of tropical cyclone warning signal number 9 or above, the MTR will stop running on open-air MTR routes. This arrangement came after severe typhoon Vicente hit Hong Kong in 2012. At the time, a huge tree fell and damaged overhead cables near Tai Po Market Station on the East Rail Line. Speaking on a radio program, Secretary for Transport and Logistics Lam Sai-hung said many MTR lines have opened over the past 10 years and it's time to conduct a review. He said even if trains cannot run on open-air MTR routes, trains that are carrying passengers should continue the journey so they can arrive at their destinations. They could even stop at underground stations for passengers to change to other rail lines. However, he added, it may not be feasible to build covers above the open-air routes because of structural safety and costs. Last Sunday night, thousands of travelers were stuck at the airport after the Airport Express was suspended under typhoon signal number 9. A lawmaker said there could be ways to help tourists who are stranded at the airport.
The arrival hall itself is actually not that large that could hold tens of thousands of passengers. The Asia Export is actually not far away. We can probably send in a few trips of Airport Express trains just between the airport and export, because the journey is not really long, and the environment, despite it's still a open area, but the environment is not that complicated like other parts of a long section of open area. So this probably could be a manageable risk that we can look into.
Meanwhile, chairman of the Hong Kong Federation of Railway Trade Unions, Lam Wei Hong, thinks the observatory should inform the MTR in advance so that it can tell the public when the last train will run. Respiratory disease expert Professor David Ho expects the number of COVID cases to peak next month. Speaking on a radio program, he urged residents who have been jabbed for over 6 months to get another COVID vaccine soon without waiting for the new generation vaccine to come to Hong Kong. David Ho said current COVID cases are relatively stable, lingering at around 80 to 120 cases per day. He also spoke on the flu situation in the city. Ho said more than half of the patients diagnosed with severe cases of influenza had not received flu shots. Still ahead on tonight's news. Hong Kong celebrates achievements by athletes in Asian Games. Conservative former businessman Christopher Luxon wins New Zealand's general election. Congressman backed by Donald Trump is now the Republicans' candidate to be House Speaker. Welcome back to TVB News. Hong Kong athletes won record number of medals in the Asian Games in Hangzhou. The government rolled out an official welcome home reception to celebrate their achievements. Chief Executive John Lee said the athletes' remarkable feats have highlighted the right direction of the government's promotion of sport. Jacqueline reports.
The welcome home reception was held at the central government offices. Chief Executive John Lee, Chief Secretary for Administration Eric Chan, and Timothy Falk, President of the Sports Federation and Olympic Committee, were all there to share the glory. Hong Kong bagged a record-breaking 53 medals from the 19th Asian Games in Hangzhou, including 8 golds and 16 silvers. Medalists received certificates of commendation from the city leader. They include fencer Eka Chern Ka Long and the swimming team, which clinched 7 medals for Hong Kong. But gold medalist swimmer Siobhan Haughey is taking part in competitions overseas and could not attend the event. Haughey's historic performance in the women's 100-meter freestyle at the Hangzhou Games have smashed both Hong Kong and Asian records. In attendance too were Hong Kong representatives for new sporting events esports and xiangqi, or Chinese chess. In his speech, the chief executive described how excited he was when witnessing Hong Kong athletes triumph during his stay in Hangzhou. Lee added how the athletes' performances are showcasing a good image for Hong Kong and tell a good Hong Kong story to the world. He added their feats also underscored the sound development of Hong Kong sport training and the soft power of sports culture shall continue to expand. Lee said the SAR government has dedicated some $7.4 billion to sport development in 2023-24 financial year. That's 40% more than 5 years ago. Jackie Lin, TVB News.
In a bid to promote harmonious relationships between foreign domestic helpers and their employers, a Caritas-sponsored group held a ceremony to recognize outstanding domestic helpers and friendly employers. The event has been held since 2012. This year, some 300 employers and helpers received recognition. They include 87-year-old Grandma Wong and her Indonesian helper. Grandma Wong lives alone after her husband passed away last year. She said her helper Annie has taken good care of her, and Annie said she treats Grandma Wong like her own family. When asked if it's possible to import mainland domestic helpers to meet the city's demand, Ho Kai Ming, Undersecretary for Labour and Welfare, said it's not that feasible. Is the use of artificial intelligence good or bad for education? That's one of the issues being addressed in Education Technology Month, a series of innovative events organized by a local non-governmental organization. It features top educators from Hong Kong and around the globe joining startups in plotting the way forward for artificial intelligence in education. Is artificial intelligence making people more human or less human? That's one of the topics raised in one of the summits during Education Technology Month. Former Director of Education Technology of the U.S. Department of Education, Joseph South, was among the speakers. He told TVB News some of the fundamental issues and mindsets that needs to be changed. For example, schools that feel threatened and not wanting AI in their classrooms.
That's a very common reaction, and it's a very human reaction to something new. But when we react that way, we don't really recognize that AI is part of all of our lives. So by holding it out of a school, you're actually holding children back from being able to access and learn about and master this technology that will be fundamental to their future. And so while we have to be wise in how we use AI in a school, banning it is not the right solution.
South noted that schools have been using the technology passively, normally as tools to show information rather than putting it in the hands of students and making them creators. South demonstrated that with a bit of creativity, artificial and human intelligence can work together.
They asked ChatGPT to be a debate partner for the young person. And so the student would take a point of view on a topic and ChatGPT would take an opposite point of view, and they would practice those skills. And then for their exam, they would actually debate with each other, because it doesn't take AI out of the equation, but it puts it in a place where it helps the student prepare for an examination, but doesn't replace the examination.
The initiative will run for a month and will consist of seminars, workshops with local school principals and teachers, as well as a tour to the Greater Bay Area.
We're going to Shenzhen and Guangzhou over the weekend. When it comes to things like AI, China has moved much quicker than other parts of the world, and we see classrooms where teachers have access to technology. They're able to track children's engagement levels within that specific level. Now, we have nothing like that in the UK or in America, so we're very interested in how that's going to progress, for foreign companies thinking about doing business in China.
Instead of fearing that AI will replace many jobs, some educators think that it's more important to reskill and upskill people. Overseas, Conservative former businessman Christopher Luxon will be New Zealand's next Prime Minister after winning a decisive election victory. New Zealanders voted for change after 6 years of a Liberal government led for most of that time by Jacinda Ardern. With most of the ballots counted, Luxon's National Party had about 40% of the vote. Under New Zealand's proportional voting system, Luxon, 53, is expected to form an alliance with the Libertarian ACT Party. Australians voted today in a referendum on whether to alter the country's constitution to recognise Indigenous people. Results by late Saturday afternoon show the No campaign leading the Yes, 55% to 45%, with 25% of the votes counted. Australians had to write yes or no on a ballot paper with a question asking whether they agree to alter the 122-year-old constitution to recognise Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island people. The vote is also about creating an Indigenous body called the Voice to Parliament that can provide advice to the government on Indigenous issues. Australia's Indigenous citizens make up 3.8% of the country's 26 million population. In the US, the latest nominee and frontrunner to be House Speaker is now Jim Jordan, who has the backing of former President Donald Trump. This came after Majority Leader Steve Scalise abruptly ended his bid when it became clear Republican holdouts would refuse to back his nomination. Tracy Furness has more.
During internal voting Friday, Republicans chose Ohio Representative Jim Jordan, whom former President Donald Trump supports, as their new nominee for House Speaker. The latest development came after John McCarthy was ousted, leaving the position vacant, and Steve Scalise ended his bid due to lack of support. Jordan will now need to unite colleagues from the deeply divided House GOP majority ahead of a public vote on the floor, possibly next week. Republicans split 124 to 81 in Friday's private vote, though a second secret ballot nudged his tally higher.
I think I can unite the conference. I think I can go tell the country what we're doing and why it matters to them, and we'll talk about that. Can you get I'm in. I think so, yes. I feel very confident in that.
Jordan had worked closely with former President Donald Trump to overturn the results of the 2020 election, leading to the January 6, 2021 attack on the Capitol. His rise would complete the far-right shift of the party and boost its defense of Trump in 4 separate legal cases, including the 2020 election fraud. House Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries immediately gathered his party on the Capitol steps, urging Republicans off from giving the gavel to Jordan.
House Republicans have just elected a Speaker nominee who in 16 years in this Congress hasn't passed a single bill because his focus has not been on the American people. His focus has been on peddling lies and conspiracy theories and driving division amongst the American people.
With the House narrowly split 221 to 212, any nominee can lose just a few Republicans before failing to reach the 217 majority needed in the face of opposition from Democrats, who will most certainly back their own leader, Hakeem Jeffries. Tracy Furness, TVB News.
2 twin baby giant pandas born in July this year in South Korea met the public for the first time. Ruibao and Huibao met the public at Everland Resort in Yongin. Their mother, Haoni, was sent to South Korea from Sichuan as part of a 15-year giant panda research cooperation program in 2016. Everland Resort determined the panda twins' names through online and offline voting, with more than 700,000 participating. That's the news. Thanks for joining us.